evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this wonderful sunny evening. The first thing I should promise you is I promise you that we will finish at 7:30, so there'll still be time to go and sit in a pub garden or your own garden. But you won't resent a thought the time that you spend here, because I think we have a really fascinating conversation this evening. I'm Matthew Taylor, Chief Executive with the RSA. A couple of difficult things. Could you make sure your mobile phone is switched to silent? But don't turn it off, because you should feel free to tweet. Hashtag is RSA Tech, T-E-C-H. Also, you'll be able to watch this event, video clips, podcasts will be available on our website in a few days' time. Tonight is one of the RSA's programme of around 120 events that we have every year, and part of the reason we're able to do that is we're able to rely on the support of key partners, and we're delighted that tonight's event is part of a special collaboration with Samsung Mobile, who've worked with us on a series of talks, debates and events looking at the social impact of technological change. So tonight, the question we're asking is, where can technology take us? It's a very broad question. And I've got with me three people who are very well placed to respond to it. Tom Chatfield is a BBC columnist, an influential commentator on digital culture, and my microphone's not working. They can still hear me though. Oh, yeah, but... Oh, right, sorry. I'm not going to say it all again. Okay, so Tom Chatfield is a BBC columnist, an influential commentator on digital culture, and author of a number of books on navigating the digital present and future, including How to Thrive in the Digital Age and Netymology. Did I pronounce that right? Brilliant. Ali Blackwell is co-founder and director of Decoded, a company that pursues digital enlightenment, principally through teaching individuals and organisations how to code. And Debbie Forster is Chief Operating Officer of CDI Europe, is that right? Good. An award-winning education technology charity overseeing business and daily operations with a particular focus on apps for good, an innovative course which teaches young people to create apps that change their world. She also serves as CDI's Europe lead expert on education, public sector and policy. Now, the way things are going to work is that I'm going to say a couple of things very briefly. I'm then going to ask the panel a couple of questions. They're going to respond. And then we're going to open it up for you to ask questions too. So we're going to make it as discursive as we possibly can. I just wanted to start, panel, with sharing with you a moment I had about a month ago, I think. I was at the LSE, and there was an event with Salman Khan from the Khan Academy. It was quite an amazing event. Absolutely, I remember 800 people there. It was packed out. He was kind of treated a bit like a rock star. And I wanted to be sceptical, partly because it wasn't an RSA event, you know. But in the end, I was kind of blown away. And it wasn't just that. The Khan Academy is this amazing phenomenon with, you know, hundreds of thousands, millions of people around the world, particularly young people, using it. But what was really amazing about it was the way in which they are able to find out, using kind of algorithms and A/B testing, they're able to find out what works. So every day they are testing, let's say, a lecture on calculus, and they're asking the students questions about it and finding out what works and what doesn't work. And if it's better to do the diagram in red, it'll be in red or blue. If it's a man's voice works better than a woman's voice or whatever. And to understand why that lecture works with particular groups of people. Does it work better with boys, with girls, with people of high ability, people with lower ability? And I thought, you know, that capacity to learn that quickly about how children learn was amazing. And then the other thing he said was that the technology had led to two really interesting things. Firstly, the reversal of the way in which the classroom works. So that more and more classrooms around the world, what's happening is the homework is to watch the Khan Academy lecture at home, on your phone or on your laptop. And then in class, people work in groups. They have a kind of more of a tutorial system. So they completely changed the kind of logic of the classroom. And then the second thing he said was that they were beginning to notice that disadvantaged young people were particularly benefiting from this. And the reason for that, and I can see you're smiling already because you recognise this story, is that when you're learning online, if there's something which requires you to go back 4 steps, you can just go back 4 steps and look at that lecture that you watched a few weeks ago. You don't have to put your hand up and ask a question which might make you look a bit foolish. So particularly for people with lower confidence, it was enabling them to revise in ways which weren't humiliating. And actually, I've seen other research which shows how important it is to young people in terms of self-esteem, particularly boys, not to look foolish in front of their peers. So I left this event thinking technology is changing everything, absolutely everything. And then, of course, you look around the world and you think, well, the economy is not growing. We've got massive inequality, terrible youth unemployment. All around the world, people are still fighting each other just because they don't like the look of each other or because they've got slightly different beliefs. So all these kind of other ideas that you've heard, that technology would transform our quality of life, that it would create a kind of global feeling of empathy and collaboration, that all the kind of barriers to progress would dissolve, well, this doesn't feel as though it's true. So my first question to you, and don't worry, my second question won't be nearly as long. I can see you're thinking, my God, when's he going to... Oh, yeah, sorry. My first question to you, panel, I'm going to start with you, Tom, is how should we understand this basic question of what does technology change and what is not changed by technology? Help me out. Was I right to come away from Salman Khan thinking the world is completely changing, or am I right to be a grumpy old git who thinks, oh, well, you know, it's great, but it's not actually changing how human beings are?
Well, I'm glad I got an easy question to start off. Am I mic'd? Can you all hear me? Yes, just about. Excellent. So I've been writing and thinking a lot about language recently, and I find language one useful window into this question, because if one looks at the sweep of human history, you fairly quickly realize that for most of humanity, for most of human history, culture, politics, society has been something that wasn't to do with them, that was done on their behalf by a tiny number of people. We've had some form of writing for about 5,000 years. We've only had mass literacy in global terms for about the last half century. Silence and darkness are the defining norms of human history. And yet just in the last couple of decades, we've got up to, next year we will have about one mobile phone for each one of the 7 billion people on the planet. We've suddenly reached a stage of mass participation in written and recorded and official culture, and in mass participation through screens, which are, by definition, interactive. And this mass articulacy is an astonishing thing, and it becomes more astonishing the more I think about it, because really for the first time in the history of humanity, we don't have a small number of people speaking on behalf of everybody else. When I look even at Twitter, even at a hashtag, which doesn't necessarily involve as many people as you might think, 16% of the UK population, far less of most other countries, nevertheless, it feels like overhearing the world thinking to itself and performing publicly. But people are speaking themselves, and as in the Khan Academy story, people are interacting and registering as actors, as agents. And we don't yet know the full consequences of this, but it really, I think, is something remarkable from a subjective point of view. But one of the lessons of complicated systems and the weightless, infinitely reproducible stuff of digital technology is, you know, the most complex system we have ever created. It's the place where everything else increasingly lives. These proliferating unintended consequences, I think, you know, are not one thing. We're realizing they have a geography. So originally, it's very interesting to look at the short history of technology. If you look at the stories people were telling about tech, the start of the 20th century and then at the dawning of the internet era, we were worried that people would be sucked away from the real into the virtual. E.M. Forster wrote a story called The Machine Stopped about people isolated from each other. In the film The Matrix, we worried about being, you know, brains in pods cut off from the real world. And in fact, really that was a false consciousness, because it's the mobile screen. It's augmentation rather than substitution. It's the constant supply of data and metadata. We don't want to be brains in jars or people in pods. It's boring, it's no fun. We'd rather come to the RSA or go to Glastonbury. We just want our phone to be there, always on, always providing that layer of connectivity and articulacy and participation in mass discourse. And this is extraordinarily powerful, and it's extraordinarily intimate. I go on the tube in London, sadly, Lots of other people do as well, and I often find that I'm touching them, and I'd rather not be, but I don't have any choice about that. We're all like this. But it occurs to me that it would be far more violating of contemporary protocol for me to reach out and touch the screen of someone else's phone and jiggle my finger around than it would be for me to merely brush against any part of their body. It's totally unacceptable to fiddle with someone else's smartphone. They are the first thing many of us touch when we wake up in the morning, the last thing we touch when we go to bed at night. My wife and I sometimes lie in bed cradling our screens, and I'm not saying that's a sign there's something wrong in our relationship, but it's a powerful index of a change in what we think ourselves to be and what we think it means to be involved in society. But these proliferating unintended consequences, I think, are by their nature. They're not good or bad as such, but they're molded by conditions we only understand belatedly, and this is terribly problematic. A lot of controversy recently about PRISM, about data, about privacy, these abstract words that have suddenly got very real. And people are turning around and saying, well, these guys are spies. What did you expect? You decided to put everything about you in a great big box and then just hoped that nobody would look in. It sounds slightly absurd, and yet really that's the tip of any number of icebergs. And I think coping with these unforeseen consequences is an immense challenge because we are so close to this stuff, because it meshes so seamlessly and beautifully with what we are like and what we want. We are seduced by technology. And seduction is not a bad thing necessarily, but it's one that can disarm us. And I think one of the things I'm looking forward to hearing about and talking about this evening is the way in which we can attempt to inoculate ourselves against these proliferating unforeseen consequences, to make ourselves resilient and robust, and not to find ourselves snared in systems that have, without us noticing, robbed us of our ability to push back, to decide, and to make meaningful choices.
Tom, that's great, and I'm hoping that we'll move on to precisely that topic slightly later. Debbie, what's your view? I'm not going to ask you what's the last thing you touch at night and the first thing you touch in the morning, but yeah, that's a whole other topic. But what's your kind of view of this conundrum of everything changing and nothing changing?
I mean, if I say to you, I'm of an age where I am pre-technology as well as post-technology, and I'm actually coming up through education. So I see this in helping run Apps for Good, but I also started, despite the accent, it's an American accent, but I've been for the last 20-some years in UK education. If I see the way that, and trying to describe a pathway, it's not dissimilar from what you're describing. I think characteristics about what have happened in technology is the proliferation that's occurred, the democratization, and then the connectivity. And in those three things, 20 years ago, I was one of those teachers that the government decided the next magic bullet was to try and train teachers about this magical or this horrible technology that was coming. And in those days, both for students and for teachers, it just wasn't there. And that was the big bogeyman, that was the great threat to education, like any new technology would be coming through since the printing press onwards. But now when I work with teachers, and you need to think about, over the last 3 years, we've worked from working with just 2 schools to 200 schools, from working with, 40 students to 20,000 students from September. And part of that is because we think we have a good idea, but it's also because of that proliferation. You cannot find a school in the UK now, or within, I would say, the developed world, where technology is not a part of the lives, maybe not the education, but the lives of both the students and the teachers. And that proliferation is really important. And it's an exciting time because it is becoming something that we accept is a tool. It's not going away. So what are we going to do with it? When I talk about the democratization, I think it's what you're talking about, and also within the Khan Academy. Education, information, but also, most excitingly, tools are being democratized. Gone are the times when a few people held the education and the power and the knowledge. Gone are the times in which the technology was the purvey of a few. And quite excitingly, Gone is the time in which technology, the tools were only the bits of those great bards, the geeks, whoever could run that. We're now at a point with open source, with tools, where young people, as young as 11, can start to create and build tools and connect into that world. And that democratization is powerful. And it means that education, innovation can happen at a rate that we could never have dreamt. The idea that Khan Academy could come at some point is not a new one. The fact that it could go worldwide, that viral quality is really powerful. And that democratization means it's not just the adults, the powers that do that, it's that young people can do that. And the connectivity means that the usual barriers within education that were there, and that adults had a certain role and young people had a role, and policy and government sat one place, and businesses and industry and experts sat another. Those walls are coming down. And for good or ill, that connectivity is here. Now we see that there's an appetite there. We have experts within our community who want to work with young people and adults who are there. And then when you think about, you put those things together, the reason I smiled so much about your questions about the Khan Academy, what that means for kids from challenging circumstances, and what that means for their learning, is if you look at the three elements I was talking about, a year ago, what we do in Apps for Good is we work with schools and we deliver a course where teachers teach young people the whole process that means they can find a problem or an issue that they care about, that they can then go through the process to understand how they could find a solution, use technology as a tool, not as a magic answer to things, but as another tool, but that they can use to create those solutions. And at the moment, that's through smartphone apps. In 5 years' time, we might look back and say, what a quaint idea, smartphone apps, etc. But at the moment, young people can do that. So the issue you were talking about, being able to go back on your learning and underprivileged children and all those sorts of things, I'm thinking about a young lad named David, who is now 15 years old, who won our competition last year, because when they come up with their app ideas, we run a competition where they can then pitch that idea to an expert audience, and winners are then chosen, and we combine them with a professional development team to take an app to market. And David was a student who was from a school in Lewisham, challenging circumstances. David was someone who would describe himself as someone who was sort of at that periphery, was starting to disengage, and shock and horror, as a 14-year-old boy, wasn't so keen on reading. I'm an English teacher, that breaks my heart, but that's a reality. And if you find reading difficult and challenging, being in a classroom, in an English classroom, where the teacher is asking questions, and much less, even worse, if you have questions, is a really scary place to be. But you have a smartphone. And as opposed to the world where we say, put the phone away, David came up with an app idea that suggested called Beat the Book, that allows teachers to ask questions that kids can answer on their smartphone. Whether they get it right or wrong is within the privacy of that smartphone, rather than looking a fool in front of your classmates. But you can also ask questions of the teacher from your smartphone. It's using a tool that he finds easy to use, safe to use. It allows that thing, so his learning, it's a part of it. It enhances it. He's gamified it, so it's fun and it's differently. That's a wonderful app idea. But when you think that that's a solution that did not come from an educational expert sitting somewhere in academia, but actually this democratization that a lad as young as 14 from a challenging circumstance, and he can create his own solution, I think, I would say I do absolutely, I'm a pragmatic optimist. I think the risk is there that those haves and have-nots get it and don't get it, and that gap could widen. But I do think within education, within young people, that proliferation, that democratization, and that connectivity, because we have experts who are desperate to work with young people to create those solutions, mean we are at an exciting time. It may be, whether it's the most of all times, I don't know. I'm not Voltaire. I'm not going to imagine this as the best of all possible worlds. But I do think we have an opportunity, if we can get in front of it as a society, as educators, changing that dynamic as the Khan Academy has accepted. It's no longer one expert, one power at the front, but where we shift that power, embrace those technologies rather than fighting it or ignoring it, some incredibly powerful innovation can come. And far from the riots that we can see happening in different countries, if we allow people to be part of those tools and that moving forward, it's an exciting time.
Ali, do you
think that kind of the technological aptitude that we're talking about, being able to code, do apps, is that just another skill, or is it in some way a kind of transformative skill in the way that kind of Debbie's been implying?
I think coding is one digital skill, or one skill that you can have that empowers you. Being able to use the web, being able to use technology just to get stuff done. You don't necessarily need to be a coder to do that. You can use software to do that. Not all software forces us to be a slave to the machine, Matrix style. You know, like there is lots of empowering software out there. You know, Google Docs. You can collaborate, you can share, whatever it is. Like, there's loads of good stuff out there that means you can get stuff done. So I think coding is a small part of a bigger thing. I'm just fascinated by the idea of, has the internet rewired our brains? Has it actually changed us?
Is that in a way what Tom's going to, I mean, if I was summarising what Tom said, it would be kind of humanity 2.0, but we're not quite sure what that's going to be in a way.
Because I've got a friend who's always complaining about how, you know, the Twitter feed that he's always reading means that he can never get through a 1,000-word article or a 3,000-word article. You know, he can never read a book. He reads novellas, the short form books. And I mean, how many people in this room would say that they think they have been changed by technology, that their human nature has been changed in some way?
Put your hand right up in the air. That's a lot of them. Right, those who are utterly unchanged. Yep,
We'll change you before the
I think that's about kind of 5 to 1.
Yeah, but I mean, that's a fascinating thought that, you know, our use of this technology what's happened just in the backdrop of our lives so far, the rise of the web, the rise of the always on, the rise of the network between us. I think that's the big difference between the dark ages of history, as you mentioned, Tom, and what we've got today, which is this connectivity between every single human being. Every single human being who has access to the internet, which is, I think, what, 2 or 3 billion? It's nowhere near enough of everybody. And I think that's the sort of the amazing thing, is that we are always connected to each other. So Tim Berners-Lee's invention, the web, he gave it free for everyone. This is for everyone. Who watched the Olympics and saw Sir Tim Berners-Lee starring in the Olympics at the...
You went to my school. Well, actually, I went to his school.
Nice. But I think, I mean, this whole question of, it hasn't really changed society. We still have got loads of poverty and loads of people who aren't empowered. There is still, you know, a major economic crisis engulfing the world, and, you know, the financial system, will it recover? You know, do we need to redesign society?
And let's not forget that financial crash was facilitated by technology, because in a way it was algorithms. It was algorithms driving the system, not people. But yeah.
Yeah, true, very true. So he gave it free. There's, you know, we've got a problem because it's also new. We're not monetizing. There's no. You know, it's this great, amazing technology, but is it empowering people? I heard someone say the other day that Kodak employed 140,000 people in decent jobs that paid well and provided a pension. Instagram employ 14, and it makes no money. And the whole model of an internet business nowadays is something that will raise investment and then will exit after 3 years and not actually make any profit, not actually make any money, not actually create any long-lasting value. So I think there's a whole wealth of things, a whole area of things bound up in this. Like, ultimately, I think the web is the most transformative invention ever, certainly since Gutenberg's printing press, because it gives publishing a new element of interactivity, and it's an interactive medium. And I think that people who have access to that and people that can publish stuff on the web and who just use the web and get it, which unfortunately isn't everybody, and that's the problem about that inoculation against being scared of technology, let's say. People who do know how to do it are empowered, fundamentally empowered. And that's where we should be aiming to get everybody. And then we should all bring our humanity to that and say, actually, no, I want to do a business here. I'm not just going to do a startup and not do anything. Or you're the Guardian. I'm not just going to not monetize and give away our journalism for free. And so there's a whole raft of issues out there which I find absolutely fascinating. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this evening.
So I think I just want to mention Evgeny Morozov, who's spoken here a couple of times, and his first book argued that we should avoid a kind of deterministic view. We should understand in a nuanced way how technology facilitates the concentration of power or the diffusion of power. And he argued, I think very convincingly, against a kind of net idealism that said there was something inherent about technology which led to kind of democratization. It could, he explored the ways in which autocrats used technology, for example. In his second book, he's written about how
technology leads to individualistic perspectives rather than social perspectives. We turn everything into how we can change individuals by finding information about them. And I'm kind of interested at the kind of broadest scale. So if you look at a new technological device, you know, a Samsung Galaxy, whatever it might be, and it gives you immense individual capacity, yeah? But, as Tom implied, things have happened which, had we been asked about them before they'd started, we probably wouldn't have agreed to. So, you know, if you'd all been sitting in this room 20 years ago and I'd said, how do you feel about an American corporation knowing more about you than you know about yourself, indeed knowing things about you that you'd really rather that nobody knew about you, including your partner, you'd have said, this is Orwellian, the idea that a corporation would have that much, but that's the world we now live in. If I'd said to you, how about a world in which children, very young children, and it's almost impossible to do anything about it, are able to access the most hardcore, bizarre pornography on their mobile phones, and there's nothing you can do about it, just hope that they can kind of survive it, whatever. You'd say, no, we need to do something about that. But the problem is, whether or not we want to do something about it, we probably can't. So the question then, and I'll start with you, Debbie, is this: how do we deal with this world in which, as Tom said, these unintended consequences happen, which can lead to fundamental shifts? But they're just inherently unpredictable. Doesn't that actually mean a pretty massive loss of human agency in the end? We're losing control here.
I think I'm going to be the optimist tonight, because I do think there's an opportunity. All of the questions you asked, I would say, could be reframed other times, but perhaps technology allows us to ask those questions. Perhaps there are other times in which there were organizations, agencies who knew a great deal, but we didn't live in a situation where we would ask those questions. I think there's a democratization where the individual can question the larger organizations and corporations. To say that there were never in society big entities that had power, access to individuals is naive. That goes back as long as there are time. I think what's interesting is that technology and the way in which technology we are interacting with it means that that dynamic is more fluid than it has been in the past. And I think it is to some degree neutral. We can, as a society, decide how much we want to question that and shape that. We've watched...
But this is the question. How can we decide when we don't know? Because this is Tom's point about unintentional consequences. Had we known what the power we were going to give to Google, we might have not given it to them, but we couldn't know.
And nothing can be. I mean, I think it is about doing, you know, and I come at this as an educationalist. Do what we have always done. Teach people not answers, but how to ask questions. Not what is the right thing to do, but how to find out that information. And that ability to do that with education becomes more and more powerful. We've watched how we've argued that social media was an inherent part of what happened in the Arab Spring. And we've watched the Arab Spring reach these dark territories. There's nothing, you know, I don't think there's anything within society that is utterly deterministic. This is inherently good, this is inherently bad. I think it's always down to the societies, the organizations, the individuals who then use it. We could have, you know, thousands and thousands of years ago, if there was a dynamic, had the same discussion about fire, about Gutenberg, etc. I think technology is a catalyst that speeds things up and slows things down, and our role as humans and thinking individuals within that is to try and understand it as quickly as possible and to be those thinking, creative individuals who harness it for, hopefully, things that are positive for that society.
What do you think, Ali, this kind of process of massive unpredicted consequences? I mean, is that something we just have to kind of revel in, or is there anything we can do about it?
I think it's really cool for a start that things just happen, and just because they can as well. And of course, you should always bring a sort of a moral element to the decisions. If you're a software developer working at Google and you make a technology that could potentially violate the privacy of every citizen in the world, you've got to think, is this a good idea?
You give me an example before.
Eric Schmidt at Google Big Ten was talking about how they'd invented a facial recognition technology they were planning on rolling out, but actually it would have been illegal in Europe, and they were, in just that aside, they were like, we can't do this, you know, this is wrong. But that doesn't always happen. You know, technologists don't always hold themselves back. But Google is a massive now. Of course, it's huge, you know, and who can imagine a world without Google? But I think we probably could, you know. It's just a tech startup in America.
Presumably what you do is you go into Google and put, imagine a world without Google. And there's probably loads and loads of sites.
And the van comes around.
Oh, right, okay.
I think there's governments and there's corporations, and governments, they're democratically accountable to us, so they do stuff, and we find PRISM and GCHQ's snooping totally unpalatable, we could rise up, and hopefully the web would facilitate that and enable that better. If it's Google, I mean, yeah, they're party to their shareholders, and if they do stuff, their shareholders are citizens too, and I do think they're not going to do evil, mainly because they say that, and I've been brainwashed probably. But I think there will always be a sense of right and wrong.
In a sense, I don't want to kind of particularly focus on Google, but the point is, I would say that evil is often to do with opportunism. You know, if you give people an immense amount of power, they are more likely to succumb to temptation, and that is, in a sense, one of these unintended consequences that we're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Tom, I mean, am I being too dystopian about all of this?
No, I don't think so. I mean, you know, one can hope with caution in the heart. I think one of the dangers of being too deterministic about these things is actually letting some blameworthy, nasty people off the hook. So you mentioned the financial crisis, and you know, the 2008 crash and crisis was facilitated and enabled by technology, but it also represented some people solving a problem. And the problem was that they couldn't make as much money as they wanted with no risk of losing. And they solved that problem brilliantly by coming up with ways of packaging, disguising, and endlessly reselling and recycling that risk. And it worked beautifully. They made staggering amounts of money. But they didn't just do this ex nihilo. They were allowed to do this. They came up with spurious self-justifications which said that only events which they thought couldn't happen would damage this. And you have these terrific and horrific negative externalities, these consequences that everybody else bears because this was allowed to happen. You have, to some degree, a system which was both too big to fail and too complex to reform. But this was a mess people got into. This isn't some law of the universe that says that banking is a technology that inexorably will progress from barter to banknotes to global bankruptcy. And when one's talking about something that is too big to fail and too complex to reform, that does start to sound a bit like something like Google. It probably is too big to fail. They're great now, they're lovely people, but in 25 or 35 or 55 years' time, they might well not be. And I think we can't let people off the hook. We can't say there is a logic in technology that's making this stuff happen. These are particular business models, particular decisions with particular consequences, not all of which we can foresee. But if we're going to try...
But in the modern, it seems to be in the modern discourse, in the modern discourse, we talk about competition. Everyone says we've got to be the most technologically savvy, enterprising, innovative economy in the world, blah, 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 blah. In that world, if you say, I think we shouldn't actually take this technology forward, the kind of decision you described for Google is so rare, the immediate reaction is, well, the Chinese will take it forward. You know, the Indians will take it forward. The Americans will take it forward. How can you be so it feels incredibly difficult to say, perhaps we just shouldn't do this.
Well, that's absolutely right. And it can feel like there's a very constrained space for maneuver, but one keeps falling into the trap of saying there is a way forward that one takes or doesn't take. And I think that, again, is a bit of buck passing, that what we need to do is get out of the mindset that the profound changes of technology brings have cut us off from the past, have cut us off from geography and politics. They are enmeshed in it deeply. If we want to do these things well, if we want to do them better than other people, to some degree, we need to draw very deeply on our specific knowledge of people, geographies, politics, human fallibility, human genius. We need to not just give free rein, as it were, to whichever particular business model is most convenient in the short term. So the quote you used on Kodak is a Jaron Lanier line from his book, Who Owns the Future? And Jaron advances a line that a lot of people have poo-pooed, saying, look, we need to stop thinking that you can give everything away and not credit originators. We need to start giving people small amounts of credit for coming up with stuff. Now, maybe he's talking nonsense, but what he is doing is saying, well, hang on a second. Who said that the logic of the internet is X? There are contingent circumstances, and it is our job to educate ourselves. And the best education is, it's about understanding specifics. It's about not throwing away every lesson of the past, every lesson of geography, every hard-won, bitter political pill that we ought to be frankly, forcing people to swallow so they can make sensible long-term decisions and safeguard, the future as best they can.
Great. Okay.
Can I just say
very briefly, because I want to
one
open
thing
it up
I
to
would say
others.
is I do think, on behalf of technology, because it is just a tool and it is about educating, throughout time, and even when I was growing up, there was a sense that there were great forces, great companies, great politics, and that was out there and that was inevitable, and how could the average person change it? And I think what has changed through technology is the individual can make an enormous impact. And I think technology has allowed that amplification and time condensation that means an individual can change things. And I think that goes back to education as well. Through the use of social media, through the things, we've seen how one or two whistleblowers can't be stopped by huge organizations, that individual questioning of, is this right, hang on a minute, is actually made easier, just as it may be possible for big corporations to become bigger and perhaps more evil. But I think the power of the David to the Goliath is also amplified, and that's where the education comes on, how we can all see there is a tool, there is a way to shape that and change that and remain an even more powerful part of that dialogue.
Great. Well, let's take some points from the floor. I've seen two hands over there to start off with. We'll take kind of 2 or 3 comments. Keep them as brief as you can, just so we can bring in lots of people. And tell us your name as well.
Hi, Richard Dijkstra. It seems to me that what you're saying is somehow, quite frightening, really, insofar as that you seem to be sort of part of a new religion and all this. It seems to me that technology is something which has been moving on for, hundreds and hundreds of years, and every so often there's a new technology which changes things. But it doesn't change things completely. Probably the steam engine changed things more. Millions of people died mining coal and all sorts of stuff. The railways changed stuff because the cities suddenly could grow much bigger and all this kind of stuff. The technology booms of the dot-com era, all these things change around. And I think the real problem is believing that somehow or other everything is going to be different. It's not. It's actually just going to be this more stuff, more added, more things happening, and you're just going to cope with it all. But it's not suddenly new and completely different.
Okay, and then there's a gentleman there.
Hi. I think the problem's in the question.
Tell us your name.
Sorry, my name is Ross Scriven. I work for the Royal College of Nursing. It shouldn't be where can technology take us, it's where can we take technology. I think that's the problem is actually in the way you frame the question. The big problem that we have with, one of the big problems we have in health at the moment is this disconnect between designers of systems and the clinicians, the practitioners, and the patients themselves. What we need to be developing is the idea of collaboration, the idea of co-design. That's what's lacking from our education system. I'm really glad that that's being addressed at the moment. But for many practitioners who find it increasingly difficult to make their voices heard in that space, it's how can we facilitate spaces where the designers and the practitioners and the patients can come together to develop better systems for the benefit of everyone.
And we'll take the gentleman right at the back there.
Good evening. Andrew Armour. I'm a fellow of the RSA and a consultant. I'd like the panel to discuss, if you could, the sense of sense and respond, because one of the big aspects in business at the moment is this whole notion of speed to respond. That was obviously one of the big issues with the financial crisis, but a friend of mine in the city explained they're moving servers and switches around London to get that much quicker to respond to information. And I suppose the question I have is, what room does that leave for decision-making and actually making the right decisions when so much of our response to what's going on is being automated?
Yeah, it's very, panel briefly so we can bring in other people, but it's quite interesting looking at the first and the third question, because the first question says, well, really nothing, in a way, things don't change that much. You shouldn't expect them to. But in a way, this last question is going absolutely to the point that maybe it's changing the whole notion of what attention span is and the possibility of the way in which we think about human decision making. And then in the middle, we have this question about how is it we can have humanistic approach to technology, as it were. So briefly, Tom, pick out something from that.
So, I mean, the Korean economist Ha-Yoon Chang is one person who said, if you're looking for the most influential invention of the last century or so, go for the washing machine because of the human time that has freed up from a crushing manual task for other things. One can split hairs over change to some degree. In a way, I think for me, saying nothing has changed almost subverts the historical pattern that almost everything changes quite regularly. But if we're trying to nail the big thing that's going on at the moment, that point about automation and information is at the heart of it for me, because we are automating things. In a way, an automated system is a set of ideas given, if you like, eternal and independent flesh to act and act upon us and act around us. And the humanistic question is, what are the ethics of automated systems? What are the ethics and consequences of designing automated systems? What do they do to us? How do they push us? How do they obstruct us from cooperating and collaborating and understanding each other better? And I think we are at the infancy of understanding these things. But I do think, in some ways, it's a harder change to detect than many others, because it's about automating a lot of other stuff that has been around forever. Technology, this vague word we're throwing around, digital technology is becoming the place where other ideas live, where social currents play out and are tested and take on a kind of life of their own. And it's very disconcerting. And it begs this question, well, you know, what exactly then is unique and special and important about us as human beings? Because machines, they have a semblance of rationality, they act independently, stuff happens. Quite clearly they're good at some things, but they're terrible at other things. They're even dangerous at other things. How should we divide up the world and the tasks between us?
Can I ask you both from the technologies that you use, the coding and the apps, do you think that we ask enough the question, or young people in particular, what will be the ultimate effect of this technology on human behaviour? Is that a question that people have time to ask? Do they ask it? Is it possible to usefully ask it? Annie?
Well, I think we go into it on the assumption that this will make life better, being able to do this stuff.
But is it too much of an assumption? Do we just assume that by making it faster, we're making it better, for example?
Potentially. That idea of automation, I mean, if you can automate something, then it's probably better that the machine does it, because it's probably beneath an enlightened human in the 21st century. And I think, has anyone read any Ian M. Banks? He died very tragically recently. Yeah. His culture novels, where computers have evolved and artificial intelligence has arrived, and they can process, they're called minds, and they can process things a million times faster than a human brain. And the minds are these great kind of overseeing, I want to say beneficent. That's not a word, though, is it? What's the word? They're these great kind of like positive, benign, yeah, kind of governors, and humans just live very happy. It sounds horrifying, I'm sure, to some, but also, I mean, it means there's no poverty. It means everyone's happy. It's a post-need society, and that idea of when things have been automated, the machines should work for us. Going back to that first point of can the software be designed for us? The government, who are doing gov.uk, massive central place for all government resources, it's basically a startup. The government team working on it, the Government Digital Service, and their motto is for you, with you, by you. And they go into the different departments and they work with the teams, and it's for them, and they design next to them, and then it's actually ultimately by the departments. It's the people who use the software actually designing it. And I think if we go into this with that mentality that software's there to help, then the big minds in the future that will ultimately govern us, I think we'll be fine.
I want to go back to David, the boy you talked about. Wouldn't it have been better to explore why it was that he felt he couldn't ask questions? He felt he couldn't engage in the classroom, rather than giving him a private solution to a social problem?
But I think it's you take people where they are and then move them from that. And if you look at David from the start of the course, and even the start of winning the competition, from someone who You know, at the start of the thing, he made it to the finals. And one of the reasons David sticks in my mind is on the day he was raising his hand to me because they had to do a pitch in front
I'm
of
sure it was
250
good for him,
kids.
but what I'm saying is, imagine a classroom where there's 27 kids and no one ever speaks because they're all sending emails to the teacher saying, "I don't really understand this." I mean, I'm not sure this is a successful classroom.
Except I would say what I think is interesting is David was doing something without knowing about Khan Academy, without knowing, he was flipping the classroom. And I think he was doing. And I think it goes back to not just David, but the rest. And it is about, one of the things we talk with the kids, it is not merely David trying to find a solution for himself. Built within our methodology is the idea of not, I want to build an app, but it's what's a problem or an issue you care about? What's that problem? And then go and interview users. So it's done with people, not to them. So even if you're 14 doing it, it's talking to teachers, it's talking to students, it's talking to developers about what's problem. So that co-creation is very much at the heart of it. And it levels that playing field where the experts and the teachers and the students are working in that sense. And so the output of that is not just for David that there's a greater understanding, but if you look at David, that young person, and trying to find that solution has moved on in confidence. I do think there's an issue because what we also talk to kids is when they're trying to find out about their apps, they have to go out and do research. Now, research is something kids have done in lots of ways. You probably did it in some ways in your schools when you were in school. But there's a difference between data and information and knowledge. And it's about helping young people realize it's not just about asking a question, it's understanding what is the right question and understanding what's the key insight from that. And that is slowing down. A lot of what we have to do in doing this, the idea of apps baits the hook for kids because that's cool, that's whizzy, that's what they want to do. And what we tell our teachers is if you're doing this right, if the kids will then be saying to you, "Oh, this is hard, excellent, that's great, that's what we want." Because actually, good use of data, good use of information, good use of technology is hard and it's slow and it's about questions, not answers. And it's asking those things and realizing it shows up other problems, not a neat fix. So I do think the issue of trying to slow things down, that haste and speed is something that's been used for hundreds and hundreds of years and never more true, to make sure the right questions are asked, the right things are delegated at that machine, automation level to free up what happens between humans. And I think that nuanced idea is one that we as humans have always done. You know, there's the same debates. Greater minds than I have gone back and looked at the writings of the time of the furore that came about when Gutenberg came about, even down to, I think, back in the time, from the Greeks when they started writing things down, and so oral tradition was going to die. As humans, we're right. There is a skepticism that comes from innovation of, oh my God, this is a terrible thing, and the enthusiasts versus the cynics. And from that, we as humans then take a tool and learn to adapt it, use it, and move it on. So things haven't changed. I just think the speed at which it happens, and we need to master that rate of change as much as we've mastered the mastery of tools.
It occurs to me that one of the most frequently made claims on food items, usually I think erroneously, is that they are handmade, which implies that we're not great fans of automation. I wonder whether we'll get to the stage, this isn't a question, it's just a pointless meandering, but will we get to the stage where when you're on a computer and you ask a question, it comes back, this is a handmade answer, it's not an algorithmic answer, this answer was written by a human being, it's of a different kind of quality. Anyway, we'll find out. I'm going to take 5 other comments, we're running out of time, I'm going to take 5 brief comments and then we'll bring the panel in to ask choose 1 or 2 to answer. Yeah, there's someone here.
Maggie Ellis. I'm coordinate a European technology group at London School of Economics, dealing particularly with people with disabilities or people who are older. I was looking up at the window at the walls and wondering how the people then managed without their technology. They would have made their voices heard in this room better than any of us without any technology. However, that wasn't my point. My point is that I think there are now in society people who are over-dependent on technology, and actually it's part of them opting out of the present. I go to quite a lot of events where people are on their wretched technology communicating with somebody else, about something else somewhere else and not about the present. Why they come to the present, I cannot imagine.
So they can say they were there, I suppose.
Probably. But this
So they can tweet
includes
that they're
people
there.
going to the National Theatre who are tweeting to their neighbour about the performance in front of them. It's a total discourtesy to those of us who went to see the performance. And frankly, I would bang them on the head, as I do with the programme. But the other quick point I want to make...
Very quickly.
Very quick, is I don't think we can rely on the fact that people use information that is available. And even the Technology Strategy Board, which funds technology research, is not good enough at checking that the applicants for research are not submitting stuff to get where we've already been. And that's depressing.
Okay, thank you for that. There was someone, the gentleman here. And then there's a couple of people in that comment.
Duncan Botting, Global Smart Transformation. I'm in technology quite heavily, and it's in one way quite depressing listening to some of the sort of outcomes of tonight. On the other hand, I've never yet seen anybody opt out of technology through history, through my own personal history. We seem to actually be able to adapt to it no matter what. And I think the worry that it's going to do something to us is not the worry. The worry is that we aren't going to be smart enough to be able to use it in a particularly good way is the bigger worry. And most people, I think, are in the situation where they are either in the camp of being frightened of it because they don't want to ask the question, like, how do I use it? Or they embrace it to the point where you're just horrified at what an 11-year-old can do in terms of coding. And I'm sort of the belief that the man walking in front of the car with the red flag always gets out of the way in the long run. And we go full speed ahead. So, I don't think we should actually be worried about this.
So two contrasting views there. Let me take those two questions over there. I'm going to ask you to panel to pick out one of these questions. So
I'm Brody Howard. I run my own tech startup, and I'm like the lady before. I look around the walls and I see a sense of déjà vu, a sense of revolution, and that's really what it is. We're in the next stage of a revolution. We've had many revolutions. We've had the printing press revolution. We've had the scientific revolution. We've had the Enlightenment revolution. Now we are at the digital revolution. And I'm wondering, what do you think the next revolution will be? Where will we be going forward? Now that we are in the stage of a revolution, what's the next one coming forward?
Okay, that's an irresistible question. And then, yep.
Timble Fellow. Ali, you mentioned artificial intelligence and the E&M Banks books. That was my area of research 20 years ago. Do you envisage a day when we actually have genuine AI so that my smartphone is not only more intelligent than I am, but more intelligent than any human being that's ever lived? And would that be a good thing?
That's an answer to the previous question. That's very interesting. And then finally, there's a gentleman there.
The law of unintended, Rob Aylott Fellow. The law of unintended consequences applies to every technology, whether it's nuclear or whatever. The big difference is IT now goes into so many areas. There are unintended consequences. Everything has to have a moral compass to guide it. We are talking about automated robots, killer robots, who will make choices about who they kill and when they kill. What we're really talking about here is things which are much more in the social media domain. People call it democratization. There is another word, which is anarchy. The question is, how do we have a moral compass that uses these resources wisely and not perhaps dangerously?
Actually, I think, panel, these questions all kind of come together in an interesting way. So you can answer all of them, but you can vote to answer all of them in kind of 90 seconds each. And I'm going to start with you.
Thank you. Wow, okay. I think we're all always going to be human. We're not going to be changed radically by technology. We're always going to have our humanity. And we can always use that moral compass that we all have to make decisions. The idea of there being people who are left out and not engaged with technology, and the people who are like totally with it, so much so that it's their religion. I think that doesn't need to be the case. I think through education, and just not even through like learning practical hands-on skills, just through learning about it and being having an interest in it and just understanding how things fit together, you can very quickly be kind of totally confident and comfortable living in the digital world. I think, in a million years' time, what's the technology going to look like? We're going to be smoking electronic cigarettes on spaceships, because we obviously couldn't smoke real cigarettes on spaceships. And whether we're even still here, I think it's just an incredibly exciting time to be alive. The digital revolution is happening now, and it's only just beginning on the scale. In our lifetimes, in the last 20 years, it's kind of happened, and this is just the beginning. So it's a very exciting time.
Debbie?
I think they do all link together, and I think there is an issue, and I think the issue of the have-nots, the disengaged, the not clued in is a huge one, and I think the way in which we engage that will shape the next part of what I'm saying. I think the next revolution is something that comes as an offshoot. One thread that's come through is technology is driving back and causing questions to be raised about very central things. Monetization. How does economy work? What does business mean? How does that fit within morality? We've seen through things like Arab Spring the issue, and we're seeing in a number of countries, the whole issue of how does a government represent a people, and we're forming different tribes and different affiliations and that sense of power. I think the next revolution is with the groundwork that we will have of technology. It is going to allow us to ask questions of our very basic institutions, of where is power? Who is it? Is it the state? Is it business? Is it something else? Is it the people? And I think our foundations of our institutions will be questioned, be it education, be it business, be it government. And our ability to engage the have-nots will determine whether that is anarchy or that is a really exciting, positive, glorious revolution that we can have and that we can come through. So I think it is a point that is neutral, and we can decide. We can master the wave, ride the wave, and be great surfers, or we can just be overwhelmed by that. You've picked up from me. I'm a bit of an optimist in that. I think we can get in front of that.
Tom, finally.
We were talking about adaptation and people adapt to technology, which is absolutely true, but for me, I'm unused to being a Grinch, but adaptation through technology has traditionally involved the deaths of enormous numbers of people or terrible things happening. And I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but I think part of our future is going to inevitably, as it always does, contain crises. We're going to become wise after events. The question is, how wise can we become, and after which events? We had a reference to Plato's Phaedrus earlier, where he, ironically enough, on the written word, critiques the problems of writing. The point is not that Plato was being daft. The point is he was right. We lost a lot. Oral culture died. Oral culture is gone. We lost a lot with it. We have rubbish memories now, for example. We are in a unique position because of the incredible speed of the changes surrounding us. We have 1 foot in a past and 1 foot in an unimagined future that's going on right now around us. It's unevenly distributed, as William Gibson said. And I think where I'm optimistic is in our ability to think critically about the design of technologies and to ask these questions. And I think we need a lot more of that. We need school kids sitting around and just saying, let's think critically about Facebook. What's it making me do? Is this good or bad? Is it the best it could be? Because, and this is the crucial thing, none of the technologies are the best they could be. They're not some kind of Panglossian perfection where everything is marvelous. Everything is fallible, everything is limited, everything could be better. And if we can ask intelligently enough how these systems could be better, then there is a lot to be hopeful about.
Can I say to that, the young people are already asking those questions. It's, do we want to listen to them?
Brilliant. Well, I found myself going through a loop tonight where I kind of felt a bit pessimistic. And then, in a way, the very fact that the conversation has been so thoughtful is very reassuring, because it seems to me that the suggestion that we have our eyes closed in this new world is wrong, because we're obviously thinking hard about it, and we've been helped in thinking hard about it by Tom and by Debbie and by Ali. And in a moment, I'll ask you to thank them. At the end of the session, you can go down and have a drink and a handmade canapé. They'll be served by human beings, which is part of Samsung's generosity to us tonight. So thank you again to them. So can I just ask you to thank our panel?